Welcome to my commentary tutorial for Castlevania for the NES. And this is definitely a classic game on the system, so I figured I would cover it. I beat it a few years ago, I believe, legit. But since I already beat the game legit, I used some save and load states to negate some of the penalties for death and things like that, so that I could just put together this tutorial quicker. Because, I don't want to spend too much time on games that I already beat, as I spend, most of my playtime is beating games that I haven't beaten. So most of my playthroughs are my first time beating a game. But this is just revisiting a game that I'm not super familiar with, but like I said, I did beat it once. And the main roadblock for me, why I didn't beat the game in the past and not until a few years ago, was because of the Grim Reaper boss, which there's a hallway before him that's quite difficult, plus the boss himself. And there's no health given to you before the boss. So for those reasons, the boss, these bosses in the game can be very random, and the Grim Reaper especially can be tough to manage with all the projectiles that he throws out. So I'm going to try to explain that. I actually, the only part of this video that's really refined is the Grim Reaper fight. I intentionally did that with no damage, which took me about 32 minutes of just fighting the Grim Reaper again and again. With save and load states, I just started at the boss again and again until I got it down for no damage. And that's the most refined part of the video, because I figured I should refine that part, since that's going to be the section that's probably going to give people the most trouble. And I also show how to beat it with, just the cross and the single throw, no extra, I don't have the item that gives me like extra throws where I can throw out multiple crosses at once or anything like that. So it's just single throw and the cross boomerang. And I show that without damage, so it shows that it is very doable when you learn to kind of multitask, which I'll explain a little bit more about that when I get to that segment. I did do some refinement on some of the bosses. As far as like when I did beat some of the bosses, the runs were sometimes pretty shitty on some of the later bosses, so I replayed them and rebeat them to try to get a little bit better. But I didn't spend a shitload of time on the Frankenstein boss or some of the other bosses, like Dracula, etc. I mainly focused on the Grim Reaper. I figured that would be the main thing that people were going to be stuck on. But I'll definitely break down, the bosses pretty well. I think it'll give people a rough enough idea, because it's kind of a rough playthrough for me. Like I said, it took me about 2 hours and 2 minutes to do this playthrough with save and load states to negate some of the penalties, as I said. And I always explain whenever I use save or load states for that purpose. I'll always explain that. My playthroughs are very transparent, so I'll explain exactly what I did. I've only done that a few times on the channel so far, where I've use save and load states to actually cut back my playtime. Which would be cheap if I never beat the game before. But since I beat it, there's no sense in me, going through all the punishments when I'm just trying to show a tutorial of the game. It's just a waste of time pretty much. And I'll refine these playthroughs more in the future, possibly, if I get more viewers. But right now I don't get a lot of views, so there's no sense me spending, 5 hours to make sure every part is like, no damage, or I would have to play a lot to really master the game, But it's all things that can be improved in the future. I just wanted to make this a good playthrough, just for people to be able to play through the game for the first time. This is a good Castlevania game to start with if you've never beaten a Castlevania game before. So yeah, this was my first time on the bat, I think. I don't think I reloaded this. Yeah, I didn't die at all the first 2 levels. And it was my first time playing in a while, and I had no deaths on the first 2 levels. So this is very unrefined. There's no repeating sections or anything. I just played it as I got to it for these first 2 levels. Even though it says stage 4, I'm referring to levels as the actual, sections that precede the boss. So this would be the second level as far as I'm concerned. But, yeah, not much to explain with the bat. The axe works well on him. And, I'm not even sure. I guess it's just for points, that crown. It's like a secret item. You can get it because points may be useful if you're not dying for a while, because then you can rack up some lives. The way the lives work is they let you start on the last checkpoint you got to. Usually when you go through a door, it's a checkpoint. You have unlimited continues, so but when you continue, you start at the beginning of the stage. The stage is, as I said, the part after the last boss you defeated. So That's how the game works with that. I actually would recommend... I played through the Japanese version first, which is much easier. The Japanese ROM of this game. And it's called Akumaju, Akumajo, Dracula. And, you know, you may want to play that ROM if you're playing on emulation first, just to get a feel and have an easy cruise through the game, give you a little bit of a feel for the game. But the real version is quite a bit harder. Though I do find this to be one of the easier Castlevania games and a moderate game overall. It does have some hard parts. Mainly, the only part that was really hard for me was the hallway and Grim Reaper stretch, which that's the one that I'm going to be focusing on for this tutorial. Honestly, the rest of the game really didn't give me much of an issue. I mean, you know, I'm usually pretty good at dodging and adapting to a lot of this kind of twitchy gameplay. And like I said, I didn't even die in the second level or the first level, which are, you know, pretty easy levels, but I mean, I don't think I started dying even until the third level, and I didn't remember the game at all as far as what was coming up. It's not a game I'm real familiar with. You know, I beat it, but it was a while ago. It was a few years ago, and it was a one-time thing. You may also like to check out Vampire Killer for the MSX. That's the real original Castlevania game. And that's a little bit more maze-like, where you go back and forth and collect items, but it's similar. It's also much more punishing. I believe there's no continues and maybe only a few lives, so you may be able to earn one-ups, but I did it in my Trying It Out series on my channel. So you may want to check that out, called Vampire Killer. See a little bit of that. Simon's Quest is probably the easiest Castlevania game that I beat. It's the second one. It's only easy if you use a guide, though, because it's very cryptic. It's really about figuring out shit. But the gameplay itself, like the combat, is extremely easy. A lot of the bosses you can just run past. Super easy game. But it's not easy to figure out. I mean, if you didn't have a guide, this shit is cryptic as hell. You might never figure it out. You know, but for this part, you can just go under these crushers and just duck. They won't be able to hurt you. For that crusher, I mean, just that one crusher. It's a short crusher. The other ones, you just have to, like, you want to wait till the crusher goes all the way down, then start walking as it's coming up. If you time it like that, you shouldn't have a problem. It's very easy. But yeah, I think this is a great one to start with. If you haven't beaten a Castlevania game before, I mean, it is challenging, but I'm going to recommend that you use save and load states to practice any parts that you're having trouble with. Just practice those sections again and again, whether it be a boss or a checkpoint, whatever the case is, whatever's stopping your progress. Just make a save and just keep practicing it and get it down, get better at it, you know. And then when you get back to that part in the level, you should be able to increase your percentage, you know, your chance of getting it the next time. But if you just keep going by the game's rules and getting sent back all the time, it's going to take you a lot longer to get the practice you need on those sections. And you're going to have a much lower chance of beating it. So I recommend putting in the practice where you need it. Especially on that Grim Reaper in the hallway before the Grim Reaper. That's going to be a big problem for a lot of people. So I highly recommend practicing that heavily before you, before you do your legit attempts at the game. Then you can just commit suicide and the game will start you back at the beginning of the stage, and then you can use what you learned and try to beat it. That's what I always do. This is a very easy boss. You can even use the clock on this boss that I have, the stopwatch, to stop time and whip it. And that's what I recommend doing, is saving the stopwatch, bringing it to her, and just freezing her with the stopwatch by pressing up and your strike. That uses your sub-weapons, and the stopwatch stops time, but it only seems to work on her. It may also work on the bat, but I'm not sure. The first boss, but it definitely works on the second boss here. Makes it extremely easy. It doesn't seem to work on the other bosses, but at least it works on that one. It definitely doesn't work on Frankenstein. I tried using it on that. I'm not sure. It may also work on the mummies, but I don't remember. But yeah, here I picked up a 2, which means I can throw 2 sub-weapons at once. So right now I have holy water, so I can throw 2 of those. Now, if you can somehow bring the holy water to the Grim Reaper, it's an extremely easy fight, but it's very hard to bring. But right now, you're not on the Grim Reaper level, so you don't have to worry about that for now. Just something to keep in mind, and I'm sure I'll mention it again. But yeah, much of this game is getting into a rhythm and pacing, very similar to Ninja Gaiden, which I just did a tutorial on, the original Ninja Gaiden for NES. And of course the sequels on NES. where enemies are positioned to always try to knock you in the pits, because the knockback is pretty bad in these games. So there's a lot of that. Ninja Gaiden games are a much worse offender than this game, but other Castlevania games are very bad with that as well. Always trying to catch you off guard by knocking you back into a pit. So you really got to get the flow of the level down and know what's coming up. Remember, the enemy patterns are always the same. There's no random elements to it as far as I can tell. What there is random elements to is all the bosses seem to have very random movement. So with all the bosses, you pretty much just got to get used to general management of the bosses for the most part. You know, some of them may be more predetermined, but a lot of the bosses, you know, they're not that hard, but, you know, some of them are, but you have to get used to, like, the general, like, managing, like, what they're doing by reacting to what's on screen. And that's the best way, really, that I can explain it. You know, that you can't just memorize them. You have to be able to adapt in the moment. The way I like to do it, or the way I try to play it, is, as you'll see with the Grim Reaper, is I think several steps ahead of what I'm actually reacting to in the moment. So if this goes wrong, then I can move to this location, etc., so that I'm a few steps ahead of what the game is doing. And that's what I try to do. And that's what I was able to pull off with the Grim Reaper fight with no damage. So I'll try to explain that a little bit better. That was the main one where I really had to be ahead of what the boss was doing. You'll see the rest of this playthrough is not nearly as refined. These statues are annoying with the fireballs, for sure. I'm sure there's a better way to deal with them. You can whip the fireballs, but the whip is kind of slow when it initially strikes. So I was having trouble with that, since the fireballs come out in two at a time, and they come out pretty fast once they come out. So I found that kind of difficult. I'm sure I was fucking it up. I mean, I could have played that a lot better. I just decided to take the hit and get the turkey down in this area. But yeah, I'm sure you can find a better way to play those statues, because you're going to be dealing with them in other parts as well. So you don't have to play as sloppily as I did. These bosses are not very tricky, but they can still be dangerous. You know, you want to just start whipping at, you know, the one closest to you, and try to let the rags go under you. Most of the time you're going to either have to jump them, or sometimes you can just take a few hits and whip the shit out of them. I play pretty sloppy, and, you know, I barely made it there, but as you can see, I didn't refine this boss fight. I probably should have played it a few times to do a better run. So I don't have any great tips for that, but I haven't heard of many people getting stuck in that particular fight. So like I said, since I was putting together a rough playthrough, really wanted to focus on the part that I hear people having the most trouble with, and myself, it prevented me, was the Grim Reaper area. So that's why I focused on that. But like I said, I have no problem putting together more thorough tutorials if this series gets popular and people want to see me put together more tutorials. I can put more work into them, obviously, and refine my sections and everything, and my strategy, my tips. You know, of course, if I'm playing better, I'll have better tips. So it all comes together, you know. But I thought this would be a classic game to put together a run through. It'd be a nice playthrough to add to the channel, since I don't have a lot of NES playthroughs on my channel. I've beaten about 140 NES games, but I only started capturing a few years ago, so I don't have a lot of... But it is one of my systems where I have more kills than some of the other systems. I have a few systems that I've gone over 100 games on. Xbox 360, I believe, is close to 200 games. That's the one that I have the most games beaten on. So yeah, here is very easy. There wasn't much to say about that previous section, but this part is very easy if you do what I'm going to show here. You want to whip these hunchbacks right after they land so that they jump up into your whip and die. So the idea is you don't want to whip them as they're falling. You want to whip them just after they landed. So that way they will jump right up into your whip immediately. And that's what you see me doing here. And if you do that, you can do it very quickly. I remembered this technique, so I didn't have to practice this part. It was very easy for me because I remembered the timing. But that's all you have to do. You can use the stopwatch if you still have it, obviously. Just walk under this snake. You don't have to fight it off. If you keep walking, you'll be able to walk right under the snake without taking any damage. Now, this part is tough. I do recommend having a stopwatch for this part to make it much, much easier. And Frankenstein is one of the harder bosses. One of the hardest bosses in this game, I think. But yeah, use your stopwatch and whip the snake to death. There's going to be a turkey in here. There was a dagger behind me, which would be very useful for Frankenstein, but not good for the snakes. So if you're having trouble with the snakes, you should try to bring the stopwatch to this point and maybe start over if you can't do that. Because it's going to make those snakes very, very easy. And I don't have a good tip for the snakes because they were fucking me up. I mean, I could have practiced them more, obviously, but I just didn't. So, yeah, I saved state right before the Frankenstein boss. I think this was the first time that I started saving state right before the boss so that I could just reload and not keep doing that section over and over again for no reason since I beat the game already. But, yeah, this guy is tricky. You know, the patterns are random, as I said. I noticed when I loaded state that sometimes the Hunchback would jump farther as his first jump or sometimes shorter. So that showed me that the patterns are very random in a lot of these boss encounters. And it's very noticeable with the Grim Reaper. But yeah, you want to try to focus on watching where that Hunchback is going to jump. Frankenstein is slow, but you mainly want to watch where the Hunchback jumps and the bullet he shoots out. Try to let him jump over you. And remember that when you whip him, you'll freeze him on the ground for a moment, but he's going to jump again most likely. So be ready for him to jump over you again. And you really I recommend practicing this part just heavily because it's tough. I had to practice it a little just to do that well. And you saw I didn't do great or anything, but I did decently. So that will take some practice. I recommend save and load states. So now you're actually approaching the hardest part of the game. So this is where you're going to be tested as far as your will to beat this game. If you can beat this, you'll probably beat the rest of the game with not too much trouble. Dracula can be a little tough, but he's not that bad. Not that, it's kind of tedious, but it's really not that bad. At least some people say Dracula gave them more trouble than the Reaper. It's just, it is a personal thing. Everyone's different, but yeah. So notice I got the holy water in this section. It's in one of the candles, right? Well, if you can bring that holy water to the Grim Reaper, you'll make the Grim Reaper a fucking joke. Because you can just freeze him in place on the platform he stands on. Whip him a few times, throw the holy water again. Whip him a few times, throw the holy water again. Or you may not even need to whip him. I think you may be able to just keep throwing the holy water on him and he'll just get stuck. If you time it right, you can jam him in place and beat the shit out of him. Very easy. The problem is it's very hard to get that holy water to him. You'll have to play quite well. It is doable, though. I came fairly close to it. With a little bit of practice, I could have saw myself doing it. I don't think it would have been too bad for me to do. Now here you get a double throw. This means you can throw 2 sub-weapons in the air at a time. So it is very useful, especially if you have like the crosses or something. It could be great. But you're probably not going to bring the double throw or the holy water to the boss. I'm going to assume that you're going to die at the checkpoint before the boss like I usually do. And you're going to see how to do it without taking any damage, how to beat the Grim Reaper without taking any damage from the most basic checkpoint. So meaning having none of your stuff, just starting with 0. So I think that's a good thing to show. And I kind of wanted to focus on showing how is it to beat him with no damage with just a cross. Because you could pick that up at the checkpoint. And no double throw, none of that shit. Just a cross and no damage. And I spent about 32 minutes beating the Reaper over and over again because I really wanted to show him with no damage. I thought that should be the focus of this video. And I thought it would be very cool for the boss domination series that I like to add entries to where I, try to dominate bosses and stuff. I think it's always cool to add an entry to that playlist. So, yeah. Not much to say here. I mean, obviously, you can keep those guys with the axes back. You want to try to whip them. Whip their axes as they come out and just push them back. You saw I pushed the first one back off the screen and he didn't come back. And, the second one, you just want to play carefully. That's all. These skeletons, once you whip them, they go into a heap of bones. And you can walk over the heap of bones if you want. See that triple? That's the triple throw. No, I shouldn't have whipped it there because I wasted my opportunity to grab it. But it was okay because, like I said, I didn't end up using it for what I was going to demonstrate anyway. But if you wanted to, you could whip it and go up those stairs and retrieve it. But yeah, these red guys turn into a heap of bones, and you can walk over the bones, as you see, without getting hurt. But they will come back up, so be careful that you're not walking over the bones as they're standing back up. They only stay down for a moment. Of course, now, push these axe guys back by whipping the axes and walking towards them, and they'll just keep running backwards. You're going to need to be very good at this for this next hallway coming up, which I suggest just practice save and load states, because you're not going to get any health replenishment after a certain part. So that makes it pretty tough. It's pretty unforgiving. But like I said, you're at the home stretch. If you can finish the Reaper, then you're pretty much good to go on the rest of the game. So focus on that and don't get too discouraged. Just remember, putting in that time to practice is going to pay, and eventually you will raise your percentage that you're going to have a successful attempt on the Reaper. And eventually it'll go through. Your attempt will go through and you'll beat it. So that's how that's how these card games go down. Same thing I did here, when I was playing. It's just keep going again and again. Of course, I didn't have to suffer the penalties that I did originally when I beat it legit. So it was a luxury to be able to play it like this, obviously. But yeah, you got another one of those fucking statues that annoys me. So I did take a hit on that. This one is very easy, though. For this one, just peep your head up just a little bit so that the fireball can't touch your head and hit you, and you can just whip it or throw the cross, whichever you prefer. But yeah, you get the cross in this area, so there's no reason not to have it for the Reaper. There's really no reason not to bring it with you. And of course, if you have the holy water, keep that. Don't get the cross. But yeah, this is where it gets tough. So for this, you're going to have to manage the axes, and remember, they do come back. So you're going to have to duck them sometimes. Other times you're going to have to jump them, all while managing jumping the Medusa heads. And honestly, there's not much of a good tip for this except for multitasking and just, skill and practice. Because it's not the easiest thing to dodge, as you can see. So, it can take some work. Now, for this part, this is going to be the no damage Reaper run. And what I did for this, my main strategy was to throw the cross out at the Reaper and let the cross work on the Reaper. Right? And while the cross is doing its thing, I'm doing my thing, clearing out the scythes. I'm clearing out all the projectiles so that I have clearance to be able to jump and move as I need to as the boss moves around and as more projectiles appear. So it's just like extreme multitasking is what it is. But remember, don't look at the boss when you're throwing out the cross. Don't waste your focus looking at the boss. Throw the cross out, let it do its thing. It will usually hit the boss twice. So let the cross do its thing as it's working on the boss. Because it hits him and then it comes back. Usually gets in 2 hits since he's so big. So throw the cross out, let it do its work, you know what I mean? And then just work on taking those scythes out, jumping and ducking as you need to. You want to try to whip 2 scythes at a time to clear them out faster and more effectively. So just keep these things in mind and just keep practicing with save and load states until you get fluid with the Reaper. Now, even though I did a no damage run on him, I wasn't beating him every time that I played him in practice. I was still losing sometimes, but I got good to where I was beating him quite a number of times consistently. Not no damage, just beating him with like maybe 1 hit left or sometimes 2 hits left, but usually just like maybe 1 hit left that I could take. So it was close. And I didn't have full health when I got to him, as you saw. But it is possible to do it without damage. It's very possible, but you're probably not going to play that well when you get there in a real run. I mean, I probably wouldn't either. You know what I mean? I had the luxury of using save and load states to start right there. So obviously that was a huge convenience than having to repeat the sections every time I died, So, while I did start at the beginning of the boss fight, it's just a huge convenience to be able to do that. But, I afford myself that luxury because I already beat it. You know what I mean? And there's no reason for me to have to go through the whole game again, legit. And I'm also not trying to deceive anybody. Like World of Long Plays, if you watch that channel, they use save and load states to dodge shit, like in the middle of the playthrough, not even at the beginning of a checkpoint, but like while the game is going, they use save and load states to repeat various parts just so that it's flawless and that the runs become no damage runs. It's ridiculous. But, I mean, they don't even admit that they do that most of the time. So, I believe in being transparent. Not much to say with these parts. I think it kind of explains itself. I mean, it's a little tricky. You can use the stopwatch if you like to make the hunchbacks and eagles easier. Now for this, I recommend farming up some hearts. You're going to see that I grabbed some hearts here. Don't go through that entrance. Start walking back and go back down the stairs. And you're going to like reset the screen. So go back down, boom, back up. Now you resetted the screen. And just keep doing this. I edited out the farming because there's no need to show me going back and forth until I got like 60 hearts or whatever it was. 62 hearts, right? So no need to show that. And I also made a save state before the boss with all my items farmed up, obviously. So I wasn't going to keep repeating farming every time. But you will have to do that. Unfortunately, you do have to do that when you play the actual game. But, like I said, save time and just use save and load states to practice this boss a lot. Then start doing the full farming and all that. Get it down first. Don't waste your time farming each time when you haven't even practiced the boss. Now, for this boss, you can jump straight up. Don't try to jump across. I was jumping across horizontally like that, and it made it much harder to do. I recommend most of the time just jump straight up when you see his arm open up, and you'll get the timing down. You have to memorize that timing. But if you jump at the right moment, you can jump over them each time and whip at the same time because you have very little time to hit him in the head. You have to whip immediately. So it's going to take some practice to get that down. I only got hit once in this attempt, so this was a pretty solid attempt. What I got hit by was when his body appeared. So make sure you're constantly on the move. If you stop while he's appearing, you're most likely going to get hit because he's going to appear right on you and hit you. So keep that in mind. You got to keep moving when he's about to disappear again. Just keep, see, I stopped. The reason I stopped is because I'm using a very stiff D-pad on the ASCII controller. I should have used the Saturn pad. It makes me crouch a lot, which sucks, and throw the sub-weapons, which also sucks. But it was good enough. So now for this part, you wanted to have the holy water. I should have mentioned that. And what you're going to do is throw the holy water down. It's going to keep him in place. Whip his head like once or twice, throw the holy water again. And if you do it effectively enough, you'll keep him glued to the ground, and he won't even be able to get up. Now, I didn't execute it that well, but it was good enough for you to get the idea. Every time you use the holy water, it will keep him in place, glued to the floor. So while that flame is active, obviously. So that's when you're going to whip him in the head. You got to hit him in the head. But practice both sections. Practice the second form and practice the first form thoroughly. Then commit suicide and just replay the entire section again. And with that in mind, you should be able to beat the game. So I hope that helped. You got any other questions or any other suggestions for games you want to see? Anything like that, let me know. I never beat Castlevania 3 for the NES. It's one of the few games, older Castlevania games I never beat. So I would like to actually do a run on that sometime. I may have to do that at some point. That would be a brand new game for me to beat because I've never actually completed that. And it's a great game. My favorite is Super Castlevania 4. I think that's my favorite Castlevania game of all time. I know a lot of people like Symphony of the Night for PS1, but for me it's Super Castlevania 4. I did take a major shortcut in Symphony of the Night, so I beat it really fast, which I tend to do. I'm kind of a cheap motherfucker when it comes to skipping through games, like taking warps and stuff. So I would actually like to beat that game fully through one day, just to experience the full game, because to be honest, I really barely experienced that game. And it's kind of a shame because it's a classic game that I should have fully experienced. So yeah, try, I would say this is a good first Castlevania game to beat. It is one of the easier ones. Try the Japanese version if you're having trouble with this, just to get a feel for the layout of the game. It is much easier. I forgot exactly what, I think it's much easier because you only take like 1 damage when you get hit, or something like that. So yeah, after you beat the game, it repeats. And, yeah, I guess that's about all for my rambling, but thanks for watching.